Okay, let's get into this. We're doing a deep dive into these sources you've pulled together on Operation Sindoor. That's the big Indian military operation starting May 7th, 2025, just after that awful Pahalgam attack.
Exactly. And looking through these documents, what really jumps out is that this wasn't positioned as just, another surgical strike. India was signaling something bigger.
A real shift.
Yeah, move away from that sort of strategic restraint towards, a more assertive, sustained offensive. The idea was to really degrade terrorist capabilities deep inside Pakistan and Pak. They actually called it a redefinition, trying to hike up the costs of cross-border terrorism.
Right, after years of dealing with attacks. And the sources, they detail the Indian Air Force leading the charge using this composite air package, Rafale Su-30s, Mirage 2000s.
For those precision intel strikes.
And India was, initially at least, quite specific, saying the focus was purely on terror infrastructure. They named groups like JEM and Laiti, that's Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-Taiba, and explicitly said no military targets in that first wave.
But then, things escalated. Fast. That same night, according to these sources, aerial engagement started happening. And suddenly, claims and counterclaims about aircraft losses just started flying.
Oh, absolutely. And Pakistan's claims were incredibly specific. They put out numbers saying 6 Indian jets were down. And notably, they specified up to 4 were French-made Rafales.
Right, and they claimed their Chinese J-10Cs, using PL-15E missiles, did the job. Pakistan's foreign minister even went public saying the key difference there. Acknowledging something happened, but flatly denying Pakistan's numbers and the types, especially that 4 Rafale figure.
Exactly. He actually emphasized, quote, numbers are not important. But understanding why they were down, what mistakes were made, that was the critical thing for them.
So you're stuck with these 2 very different stories. How did the sources help us figure out what might have actually happened on the ground, or rather, in the air?
Well, this is where some independent reporting mentioned in our sources comes in. Investigations, like one the Washington Post apparently did, looked at open source images, satellite data maybe, and physically verified debris found on the ground.
And what did they find?
They reported finding wreckage that it was consistent with at least 1 Indian Air Force Rafale and also 1 Mirage 2000. They apparently even matched specific markings on a piece of debris to an IAF Rafale tail number.
Wow. Okay, so if even 1 Rafale loss is definitively confirmed, that is a big deal globally. It'll likely be its first combat loss ever after deployments elsewhere.
Huge deal. A major point for the manufacturer, Dassault Aviation, obviously, and a blow for India, given their significant investment in the platform. The sources even mentioned the French were reportedly concerned, wanted to send an audit team.
Which India apparently blocked?
That's what one source suggests, yeah. Adds another layer of, opacity to the whole thing.
And this all feeds into the information war aspect, which seems intense here.
Oh, absolutely. I remember those initial images Pakistan pushed, supposedly showing Rafale debris. Experts cited in the sources jumped on those pretty quickly.
Right, using things like manufacturing stamps and design details to show it was actually, an old drop tank from a Mirage 2000.
Exactly. Old Mirage hardware, not a new Rafale. And India's CDS himself said something like 15% of their military's effort during the operation was just pushing back against these fake narratives.
It just shows information is absolutely part of the battlefield now. You have Pakistan's very specific, maybe overly specific claims, some linked to social media, versus India's more guarded stance, focusing on debunking. It's different strategies for controlling the narrative.
Beyond the planes and the propaganda, do the sources hint at why things might have happened the way they did, the aerial results?
They touch on a few potential factors. The nature of the engagements, maybe more beyond visual range, BVR, combat, which could make classic dogfighting skills less critical.
And the missiles themselves.
Yeah, the alleged effectiveness of things like that long-range PL-15E that Pakistan uses. Plus, there were mentions in some background material of, pre-existing issues for India, like pilot shortages that had been acknowledged before this kicked off.
All potentially feeding into those tactical mistakes the Indian CDS referred to, perhaps?
It's plausible.
Yeah.
It suggests the reality of air combat is complex. It's not just the tech, it's training, maintenance, readiness, the specific situation, and what the other side brings to the table.
So tying it all together, Operation Sindoor marks this clear shift in Indian posture, more assertive. But these aerial clashes, whatever the final confirmed tally, they highlighted potential vulnerabilities.
Definitely. It shows that interplay between technology, pilot skill, strategy, and, critically, an adversary's own evolving capabilities. And it really underscores the strategic challenge for India from that deepening China-Pakistan military relationship. It seems to be chipping away at India's traditional technological edge in the region.
So, wrapping this up, what we see is this stark contrast in the sources. Pakistan's big, precise claims, India acknowledging some unspecified losses but strongly denying the specifics, and independent verification leaning towards confirming at least one Rafale and one Mirage loss.
And the key takeaway isn't just about counting down jets, it's about those potential tactical mistakes India mentioned, the role of newer long-range missiles, the huge impact of the information war, and maybe even those underlying readiness factors like pilot numbers. Modern air power is clearly a very complicated equation.
Which leaves a pretty big question for you, the listener, to think about. When you have modern conflicts like this, with contradictory official statements, patchy independent info, and everyone fighting an intense info war, how can we, looking from the outside, really know what truly happened? And what does that inherent uncertainty mean for how we understand military power and international relations going forward?